Well, a very good morning or afternoon to you all, depending on which time zone you're in. My name is Natalie Ashdown from Open Door Coaching, and it's a pleasure to be joining you all for our Mental Health Awareness Week 2020. And with me on the line today, all the way from the US, I'm joined by Lynn Brisden, who's the team leader in the US for Synergy Global, one of our wonderful strategic partners. And today, Lynn is going to be joining us to talk about building trust to support mental health using conversational intelligence. But just before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet today and acknowledge their presence, their elders past, present and future, and any people who might be joining us on the line today from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. So let me introduce you to our speaker. I've heard Lynn speak a few times, and I really feel that every time she speaks, I just like to sit back and just draw in her wisdom, and I'm sure today will be exactly the same. Lynn's strong background is in leadership and business coaching. She has 20 years experience and she is an MCC with the International Coach Federation. She has experience in coaching SME owners, directors, senior managers, and emerging leaders in large public and not-for-profit organizations. So she helps leaders thrive while building capacity to define strategy, manage change, develop collaborative teams, and she's got extensive training and certifications in conversational intelligence, which she's bringing to us today. So Lynn, that's enough from me. As I said, I always love to sit back and just listen to you and draw in all your wisdom. So let me hand it over to you. If anyone would like to interact with us, you're more than welcome to. And you can do that by popping a message into the chat box and we'll pick those messages up as we go along. So comments or questions that you might have for Lynn, we can pick those up if you just like to pop a message into the chat box. So I'll hand over to you, Lynn, and I will go on mute and turn my video off for now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate that lovely introduction. And always enjoy those paying homage to the people of the land. It gives me a sense of grounding that's really, really helpful. So today's conversation about building trust to support mental health is actually really a way of stepping into conversations in ways that we can reduce stress, establish trust, and create connection. And you've probably had lots of conversations where that does happen, and then there's conversations where that doesn't happen. So today's workshop, we're going to cover off a few different things. We're going to examine and take a look at some of the best and worst conversations just to give us some context. And then we're going to dive a little bit into the neuroscience of conversation and really get a look at what's happening in our brains and in our bodies when we're in conversation. And then with that as a framework, we'll be able to look at how we can co-create trust with what the author of the work of conversational intelligence called Conversational Essentials. And then we'll wrap up with looking at what we learned. Now, I will speak to the author of Conversational Intelligence, the book and all of the body of work and the coaching program that went with it is Judith E. Glaser. And this was her life's work, literally. We lost her a couple of years ago. And there were a lot of people that were very passionate about continuing on her work, and I am one of them. Now, Judith worked at a very, very high executive level for, Fortune 50 companies in the US and around the globe. And she, through her observation, and then backed up her observations with neuroscience research to get her book published. And she noticed that many conversations missed the mark. And in fact, research shows that 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. And if you can see the words around the sort of picture of the globe here, that we hear like 1,600 words at least. And there are trillions of conversations going on all the time, every day. And 9 out of 10 miss the mark. So Instead of using conversations to create trust, healthy connections, we fall into these patterns of talking past each. You know, you've probably been in those conversations where I'm on one level and you're on another, and we're just not connecting, banging heads, getting addicted to being right, you know, just needing to be the one who's on top of the conversation all the time. And through that, allowing the lower parts of the brain that trigger fear and judgment to take over. And that's for most of us who are, you know, have a lot of mental stability. And now if we imagine what that's like if you've also got a mental health challenge, you know, and there's such a range of those, it's even more challenging. And so when we look at these patterns of conversation for the purposes of this presentation and in Judith's work, we're going to talk about open and closed patterns of conversation. And the open conversations are the ones where we feel that sense of engagement, trust with the other person. When we're in those conversations, we're discovering things together, we're exploring new ideas, being curious about what we're finding out and where the conversation is going. It's what we would call a generative conversation. And through that, there's much, much more room for innovation, creativity, coming up with new ideas that create change. There's a lot of inspiration there possibly too. And so, and in a closed conversation, we are experiencing monologues. There might be two people talking, but they're talking at each other. There's moving into telling, yelling, and selling. Or they may even be addicted to being right. And you've probably seen people who are feeling that way and exhibiting those behaviors. I just noticed that in the chat it says, please provide the author's name, and I'm just going to write that in there for you. And that is Judith E. Glaser, Conversational Intelligence. So, for our own experience, we're going to just think about those conversations that we've been in recently, maybe not so recently, and think about the conversations that we would say are some of the best conversations and some of the worst conversations, just to get a sense for the difference between the two of them. I know we all can easily figure that out, but just for the sake of exploration here, imagine the last conversation that you were in that did not go so well. You know, it's amazing, you know, how our imagination and just recalling an event and reflecting on it can bring up some of the same experience and some of the same neurochemical patterns even than as when we had that. Maybe not as strong, but they're still there. So just thinking about one of those conversations that didn't go so well, and I'm going to ask you to pop into the chat some words that you would describe how you felt, maybe. Or what kinds of behaviors you saw exhibited by yourself or the other person. And what might be the characteristics of that kind of conversation where things were not going so great between you and the other person. Not listened to, yes, on both sides. I'm getting some best ones here. Hadn't prepared my goals. Tone not great, yeah. Frustration, and no depth to answers, yeah. It all just kind of stays really surface. And at the very worst, it may escalate even into some overheated emotions and some loud tones. And so we can just let go of that for the moment and now look at some of the best conversations. And when you're in one of those really lovely conversations with somebody who, maybe it's somebody that you care about, you feel good being around, or maybe it's somebody you just met. What are some of the feelings that you have? Respect, values-based behavior, curiosity, eye-to-eye contact, engaged. Yeah. Trust and honesty. This is great. Really great to see your responses in the chat. And so in her work, Judith, created some comparisons. And here's not every single word that we could possibly imagine to describe some of the best and worst or open and closed conversations. And if you notice, there's a poster on my wall behind me, and that's actually these words I've got up on the screen right now are there. And so we can have, they're kind of opposites. We can be including or excluding, appreciating or judging, expanding or limiting, sharing or withholding, discovering as opposed to knowing. And when we say knowing, it's that I know it all already. I don't know. I don't need to know anything else. So there's a closing down with that. And then we're developing or dictating. And or finally, we can be celebrating new ideas, just wonderful feelings of being together, or criticizing. And I am just noticing that the light from my window has shone right on me, and I'm just going to pop up for a second and close the blinds. I'm back. Okay, thank you. So when we're working with the ideas in conversational intelligence, one of the ways that we can approach this is to have this image in our mind of what we call the trust dashboard. And using this to gauge at any time how I might be bringing myself into the conversation, or how someone else might be coming into the conversation as well. And so you can see that there's this arc of engagement, which is part of the trust dashboard. And then on the one side, that's kind of green and blue, we have high trust. And on the other side, where we've got the red, orange, there's low trust. And up at the top with conditional trust, we have that wait and see mode. And so you can relate to this, that when you're in a low trust state, you may be feeling protective. You're not really sure if you're ready to put your cards on the table or, let people know what's going on for you. You might be resistant in the conversation. And you can see that there's parts of the brain that are highlighted in this diagram as well. And so when we're in that resistant, skeptic, low trust mode, this is where we're more likely to be activating a stress response that's being governed by the amygdala. When we're in the wait and see mode, that's the conditional trust. It's kind of, you're not quite skeptical anymore, but you're kind of not sure, am I going to make a move? Am I going to let my viewpoints be known? I really want to gauge the whole situation before I say anything, or, it's really, really about being cautious. Whereas if we get into the high trust state, then we can be more open and willing to try things out, experiment, and then finally moving into being in a co-creative experience with someone else in conversation. And so if we think about the kinds of people that we're honoring this week with Mental Health Week, and who might be coming into conversation with some challenges going on, where might we more likely see those people? And you can just, pop some words into chat there. What's most likely going to be going on for somebody who's got some mental health challenges? And I'll just share, I guess, from my work, not so much with people in leadership. Yeah, sitting with the uncertainty and fear, absolutely. That's going to be happening quite a lot. In the work that I did with business startups, there were quite a few people coming into the program who, were challenged in one way or the other. Sometimes there was a mental health challenge. Sometimes there were physical disabilities. Just, I guess probably about 10 to 15% of the people that we saw. And I found that using this gauge was quite helpful in being able to get a sense for whether someone was in a healthy, trusting place, or if they might have something going on that was getting in the way of them being able to engage in a trusting conversation. And yes, Heather Jane, thank you. Yes, anxiety and depression are so common, especially with the COVID and the lockdown. Yeah, and that's it. We're seeing more people with mental health challenges, people who probably would normally be healthy, with all of the different challenges that we're experiencing now, have really started to display characteristics that are going to make a trusting conversation a little more difficult. I know I have a daughter who works in retail, and she just said, people's tempers are flaring more easily. People come in kind of anxious or frustrated. Some people are just coming in to go shopping to get out of the house. So she's living in an area where they're still able to open their store, but in limited capacity, and so only so many at a time. But yeah, there's definitely a higher likelihood of someone coming in displaying emotions that are not as healthy, you say. So with being able to access this dashboard, it can give us a really good indicator of what's the starting point that we want to come in at in conversation. If we see that somebody's being a little anxious or, shut down, maybe our first overture is to say something that could help to set the tone for trust, to prime for trust even. And so to get a little bit of an understanding on how all this works, and this may be, a review for some of you, but the work that Judith pulled together looked at 5 parts of the brain. There's actually more, like 6 now, but I'll get to that in a minute. But so for our purposes, we're looking at the 5, the amygdala being the one part of it that is always watching for threats. And this is down here, what they call the primitive brain, very instinctive. We react without thinking. It's very survival based and protective. And so this is, very much tied into those fight, flight, freeze, appease, stress responses. And we probably all heard about, amygdala hijack that gets talked about in emotional intelligence and what have you. And then we've got the limbic brain. And this is more tied into our emotions overall, and very much concerned with meeting our needs, determining whether or not I'm fitting in, do I belong or not. And in fact, our limbic system can get very hooked into meeting certain things or feelings or qualities, and it can get tied into addictions a little bit too. But our limbic brain just wants what it wants. Then there's some neocortex, And the neocortex, and this is the blue part up at the top, that's sorting through data. It's really pulling in from the senses, looking, seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, and then making sense of all of that data. And through that, we gain understanding of what's going on around us and within us as well. And then the other parts that we are looking at for this is the prefrontal cortex. This is the green part here. And this is where the executive brain functioning happens, or this is activated when we're making judgment calls, when we can tap into having empathy and foresight, visioning. This is where we're, the creativity and the innovation take place. And then we have the heart brain, which isn't part of the brain, but it's very much tied into the brain, because what's happening is as neurochemicals are distributed through the body, the heart is reading those hormonal messages and sending signals to the rest of the body and back to the brain saying, well, okay, in terms of relationship, it's okay to connect now. When we're feeling that sense of safety, then we know we can connect. And I also mentioned that they're actually talking about 6 brains now, and including the gut brain. And the stomach and the intestines are all part of that mechanism as well. So, when we talk about we trust our guts, I think the Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine people draw a correlation between the intestines and the gray matter in the brain, that they're all connected. And in fact, recently listening to Marsha Reynolds talk on one of the WebEx programs about the tie-in between the brain, the heart, and the guts, is that they were all part of the same layer in cell division when we're embryonic. So they're all connected, and we're this entire system that's working together. And how the gut can play in is, we get those feelings and sensations in the gut, and there are neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut. Like, if we don't have the right nutrients and microbiome to produce serotonin, it can affect how much we have of that to uptake into our senses. Also research on the skin brain now. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, how much do we feel and sense through our skin? Oh my goodness. Yeah. So we are just this walking around sensing, data sensing unit of experience. So, and the skin's the largest organ in the body. Yeah, thanks, Heather Jane. So all of this is working together. And when we look at this, I also like to pull in the information that comes out of HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute that is based in the US. And they've been studying for years how the heart is, and how the heart is beating is an indicator of how we're feeling, and when we have coherent rhythmic heart rhythms, then we're more likely to be experiencing a positive, pleasurable brain state. And there's a nice smooth wave pattern. Whereas incoherent, irregular, chaotic patterns would be an indicator of more disturbed and frustrated negative states. And so it's like the heart is emitting frequencies based on how we're feeling. And have you ever noticed that when you walk into a room or become close to somebody who's having a bad day or feeling particularly negative, that you sense that? It's even before you think about it. And part of that is, the reason for that is that our heart is not only emitting, it is sensing this frequency data that's coming off of other people. Now, you might hear this and think, well, this is a bit, we're getting out there, Lynn, come on. But actually, this is science now. And to tell you the truth, learning about this was what really, really connected for me when I started hearing about conversational intelligence, because I started into coaching after becoming an energy healer and learning about how we perceive frequencies from other people, from more of a being aware and sensitive to it. And so I felt when I started to listen to what Judith had to say and started reading more about this heart method, I felt kind of vindicated that I wasn't so flaky after all. This, science is now backing it up. And so what some of the science is telling us is that we are perceiving this information from one another all the time, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before we get to that, another part of this system is the neurochemical cocktails that get served up when we're feeling certain ways. So we're going back to this open idea of open conversations and open engagements that are more trusting. Those are when the feel-good chemicals like the oxytocin and dopamine are running through our system, and the serotonin. And with these, we can access the prefrontal cortex. And in fact, in our brain, an entire synaptic network that supports trust is activated when these neurochemicals are moving through our system and activating the different parts of the brain that are involved with the trust and innovation. And then when we move into those worst conversation or distrust states, when there's that closed sense, telling, selling, yelling, and being right, the amygdala being hijacked, that's when the cortisol and adrenaline are flooding through our system, and we go into the fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And and that's what's running through our heart. And our heart is reading the signals from those neurochemicals and then putting out that frequency, and then also responding to those signals coming from somebody else. And what can happen is that we can get hooked to or addicted to certain neurochemical combinations. And that's why we say when somebody's addicted to being right, they get a charge out of, being up on their high horse and feeling really right about something. And they'll keep doing it until there's a good reason not to. Another really interesting piece of information is how quickly our systems react to those outside data. We can shift from comfort to discomfort, based on a threat in 0.07 seconds. That's 7/100ths of a second. And whether you have a healthy mental sense or an unhealthy mental sense, it's going to happen that fast. And when we've got good coping strategies, we can usually kind of gauge that, maybe do some breathing, help ourselves to down-regulate and shift out of it. But if we haven't really developed good practices like that, things can escalate pretty quick. And some more information around timing, in that 0.07 seconds, we make impressions, the trust goes down, we may even lose our voice. We don't know what to say next. We're just kind of a little slower, but still pretty fast. We make a judgment in 1/10 of a second, a conclusion in a second. I knew a woman who wrote a song called "If Jumping to Conclusions Was an Olympic Event, I'd Have the Gold Medal." We all do it. We make assumptions about things that are happening, and then we need to climb back down from the ladder of assumptions. It may take a few more seconds to actually make a decision. And then in terms of being able to really stay engaged with somebody else, our listening goes inward every 12 to 18 seconds. And that may even be faster in our very, very sped up world that's full of data coming in all the time. So knowing all these pieces of information can be really useful, I find, in understanding why some of the principles of conversational intelligence actually can work to help us support the generation of trust in conversation. And also helpful to know is that the oxytocin, and it's not just oxytocin, but this is the one that's primary, that's established, that helps to establish the trust network, that circulates in our system for minutes to maybe hours. Whereas cortisol, that's produced with distrust networks, circulates in the body for up to 26 hours. And if we keep thinking about it, if we call that ruminating, digesting it over and over and over again like a cow, it can be upsetting us for many, many hours. If you find yourself having an argument with somebody who's not in the room and in your head, you can be sure that you are triggering your distrust network and producing more and more cortisol, which, we need cortisol to wake up in the morning, to get ourselves up and going and to activate us when we need to get something done. But sustained level of high cortisol really, really start to have a negative effect on our health and well-being. So anyhow, now here's a busy slide, right? But this is how, pulling all this information together, this is how the brain really works, okay? So we see over here the green arrow that says we on it. So we want to, when we're in a trusting state, we're developing more of a we-centric focus, that it's inclusive and we can work together and be together. And so we want to upregulate that. Upregulate the oxytocin to the including, appreciating, expanding, sharing, discovery. Remember those words that were in that best conversation after that? And what we really want to then do is regulate cortisol. We want to down-regulate that to minimize those I-centric behaviors that are more associated with distrust. So when we move into excluding, judging, limiting, withholding, it's more about me, and I just need to look after myself, and I'm not really caring about you so much. And through all of this, we can, with our focus on upregulating the one and downregulating the other, we can shift how the brain is working to a more beneficial conversation. If we have the skills to have those kinds of conversations. And that's what we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. And because when we really keep this in mind and make that shift from I to we, shifting from low trust to higher trust, we can transition from the I-centric to the we-centric behavior and conversation patterns. And you can see there's these patterns in between the two people's heads here. That's to represent the sort of the generative ideas that are not necessarily happening in my head or your head, but they're happening in the space between us. They're happening in how our energy fields come together. And we exchange this energy and we become more open to sharing ideas. And it's like, I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and she says, I'm a really high extrovert. She says, I know I just don't come up with ideas sitting by myself and writing and journaling. I need to have somebody to interact with. And that's how things come up and come out. And to get there, it really requires listening. You can see that's on the band at the bottom. And just here's another diagram to demonstrate that we want to upregulate the transparency, relationship building, understanding, having a shared vision of success, building truth and empathy. And you can see that creates an acronym that says trust. We want to downregulate fear, power, uncertainty, and being right, and groupthink. And groupthink is like, you know, everybody just sort of goes by consensus because everybody else is thinking in the same lines, and it's really difficult to be the one who stands apart from the crowd. And we don't really think about whether we agree or we don't. We just go along with everybody. And so with these in mind, we can regulate for trust. Now I'm going to get into a little bit more of the how-to. And one way is to think about different levels of conversation. And we talk about 3 levels in conversational intelligence. And the first level is more of a transactional influence. This is where we're telling and asking, we're sharing data points and information. It's like, so where do you live? You say the city, and what's your address? You know, it's really about placing somebody in geography or in a work position. You know, what do you do? And you know, we gain some information that we can start to categorize somebody. And, you know, if we're telling, we're just talking about what's on our mind. And we attempt to influence the outcome of the conversation through information sharing and gathering. The next level is a positional influence, where we're advocating and inquiring. And here we're hoping to influence to your position. It's like, I want you to see things the same way as I do. And so I'm going to give you information to hopefully convince you of my way of seeing things. We talk about this as positional influence. And we could be using personal or positional power to get that way. It could be, you know, I just know more than you do, and so let me tell you. And or we might ask a leading question that, you know, infers that I know the answer you should have. Or we can move into the level 3 conversation, which is more infinite, and we move into sharing and discovering. And this, excuse me, and this is where, you know, in that diagram of the 2 silhouettes with the energy in between, we're releasing energy to co-create influence. We're building on each other's ideas, and we're influencing through shifting how we each see things because of what we share. And to gain that level of conversation, there are specific ways of talking or inquiring, you think sharing and discovering. It's really about asking questions and discovering together and being curious. We're shifting away from the telling of the level 1 and even the advocating and inquiring of level 2 into just the really much more open conversations. And so then these are what we call the conversational essentials. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. And maybe we'll explore these together. So you can see that the acronym at the side here, BPALS, is BPALS, okay? Judith was really great for the acronyms that she came out to help us remember. So the B stands for being open to influence. So, you know, you come into a conversation with, you know, let go of your preconceived notions and assumptions. Climb down the ladder of assumptions to get to a clear basis point. Come in from a neutral perspective, and you may need to check in with yourself before you do. And then we want to move into priming for trust and mutual success. And this is true for every conversation, and especially true when we're all being challenged, you know, in ways that affect our mental wellness. And so what are some of the ways that we can prime for trust and mutual success? If you think about, you know, if you're setting up a conversation with somebody else, or maybe just starting to chat with somebody that you across the counter with a plexiglass on it, or however you're doing it. how do we prime for trust when we're entering a conversation? Pop some words or some thoughts into the chat room. Ask them how they're feeling. Yeah. Look people straight in the eye, you know, give them a caring look, you know, and it's also and find commonality. Yeah. Another thing we can do is be mindful of the space between us, you know, and depending on how we're being attending to our safety and social distancing, just make sure that we've got this space. We might want to kind of check with somebody, you know, are we feeling okay? You know, and if you were meeting with somebody in a room, I know when I was working in a not-for-profit, and we always had some established some guidelines around make sure that the person that you're having in your office has the closest access to the door. Don't have them feel blocked in. You know, make sure they're comfortable before we start the conversation. All these things, you know, it's not just the conversation, but there's a lot of different spatial considerations to prime for trust. Listen with genuine empathy, talk less, and listen and ask more. Yes, yeah. So after we've primed for trust and mutual success, it's like here's what we'd like to get to today. What would you like to get to today? Like in coaching conversations, that's one of the first things we start with. Okay, well, when the time we have, where would we like to go? And then I think this next one, the A for ask questions for which you have no answers. I think for me, this is the one that is most helpful and distinguishes those kinds of questions from, you know, puts them in that level 3 category of being curious and open. If I ask a question that I don't know the answer to, it's letting go of any ideas that I have about what the answer might be. It's letting go of any assumptions I might have about what I think this person needs to be paying attention to. And it really frees up space for them to express whatever it is that is going on for them. And you know, for those of you who are coaches, you know, in one of our core competencies with the ICF, we're really meant to not ask leading questions. So, you know, when you ask a leading question, it's like you already know the answer to that question, or you think you know. So this really, you know, and I know this is what helped me raise the bar and get my MCC, was to really ask questions that I didn't know the answers to. And sometimes we have to think about it first. You know, you have to stop and say, okay, do I know the answer to this question? And don't ask that one. And the next one is the L for listen to connect. How often are we listening to somebody so that we can just dismiss what they had to say and interject our viewpoint? That would be, you know, more of a positional. And also, there's another way that people listen, and it's more of a positional piece of listening to see where's the holes in their argument so that I can jump in and prove them wrong, you know, which would be rejecting again or present my ideas. So it's really, really, you know, backing off, listening, so with that connection as top of mind. And then the S is to sustain conversational agility. And conversational agility has to do with being able to direct a conversation, to guide a conversation, to refocus the direction. And, you know, maybe make sure, are we going in the right direction? Have things kind of gotten on a divergent path, and do we want to come back to what we initially agreed on? Maybe there's a perspective that's being presented by the person that we're talking to, or you know, it's obvious that they're operating off some assumption of how things have gone, And perhaps we want to reframe that and then redirect. And, as I was putting this together, I was thinking about a conversation that I had with a client at one point. This was a business client, a small business client. And she came into my office and she was upset. And she was fit to be tied, actually, and about an exchange that, well, she hadn't really had it yet, but it was something that she needed to talk to somebody about. And she was not looking forward to this. So I asked her, I got curious, I said, so what happened? And without going into a lot of details, there was money involved. She had given this person some money to wire it to a supplier, and then the products never came in. And so this woman had decided that her friend had stolen the money. And how was she going to address that? And I was actually taking the conversational intelligence at the time, and I thought, how can I get my client to maybe down-regulate some of this stress? And, I see how she came to that conclusion, and she could be right. But let's explore this a little bit. And so I asked her some questions that I didn't have the answers to. I didn't say, how do you know? Or why do you think that? I just kind of said, so what happened? And I listened. And as I listened and listened to what happened and asked a few more questions and just stayed connected with her and even affirmed, I can really see that that's what it looks like, and that it would be that, really easy to accuse your friend. And she's, I don't want to. She's my friend. I don't want to lose my friend. And then as she calmed down, I can't remember exactly the question I asked her, but it became apparent that we kind of went back to when she had given this person the money and what was happening. Anyway, through it all, we came up with a way that she could approach her friend that wasn't about her accusing her for taking the money. That just went in and say, well, you know what? I gave it to you. I thought this was going to happen. I haven't received my shipment yet, so I'm kind of curious about what's going on. Turned out her friend had put the money under her cash register and forgot about it. They finished up the transaction and everything worked out. But I'm so glad that we had that conversation, and she was able to reframe through how we talked about it, her viewpoint on what happened, and actually get to a place where she was able to discover with her friend what had gone on, and their friendship stayed intact. And I'm sure you've all had conversations that could have gone one way or the other, and that, being able to have that kind of agility has been really beneficial. Another technique that can be super helpful is we call double clicking. And it's just like, with your mouse, you double click on a file and open it. Somebody says something and you go, tell me more about that. Can I hear more about that? Can I double click on this? What's inside that? Rather than make an assumption about what you just heard. Because if you make an assumption, 9 times out of 10, more times than not, you're layering your own viewpoints and perspectives and experience on that, and not necessarily fully what's going on for that person. So it's really helpful. And I'll give you another example that I've found this one was really helpful for. I've been married to my husband for several years, and he's someone who speaks very slowly. And oftentimes I would make up what the rest of that sentence was before he could get it out of his mouth. Or he'd say, do you mean this? And he would just sit back and he'd go, no, that's not what I mean. And you've just taken the conversation in a completely different direction. So learning this skill and practicing the skill of double clicking with my husband was very, very helpful. You know, we usually don't have a testy relationship anyway, but that was just one of those little sticking points that I was able to clean up. So that is the conversational essentials, and these, all of these support having conversations that are more open, build trust, and reduce stress, and so can be a great asset and assist when we're having conversations with people in good times and bad times. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation, but it's always helpful to look at what have we learned before we go off in our unique directions. And the way that we play with learning in conversational intelligence is to look at the word learn as an acronym and first say, what did you like most? And you can just pop some words into the chat area. Well, I liked getting some responses in the chat room as we were going through this and getting some engagement. Colorful diagrams. Yes, they are colorful and they do tend to stick in our minds. Very informative. Thank you. And what excited you? What did you hear today that excited you to maybe want to learn more or just practice? Practicing the conversational essentials, yeah. And practice these strategies for sure. And then, you know, when we're learning, sometimes we bump up against things that we thought things were one way, but it's the other. So it might even create some anxiousness, or, you know, maybe something else that went through our mind created some anxiousness for you. What might have created some of that for you? Okay, nothing anxious. Okay. How best to use this with people struggling with mental health issues? Yeah, I can hear you. It would probably want to practice with people who don't have mental health issues first. So how to be genuine with sharing and discovering. That's actually a really good question. It's like, and so how can you find that place within yourself of being curious and really set aside the part of you that has maybe has some ideas about what's going on. And then finally, what can we celebrate? Not finally, next. What can we celebrate? Every time I hear about CIQ, I get a little clearer about it. Okay, great. Judith would be smiling. Yeah. Yeah. Every once in a while, I hear a song coming. Actually, it was not long after she passed. I was walking through a grocery store, and there was a song that she played a lot on the webinars, and it was just like, okay, yeah, she's here. And then, what are your next steps? What would you like to take on to bring these ideas into the world, into your conversations, especially now? Okay. Always working on asking questions that have no answers, going deeper with people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that I find it. Maybe now sometimes we have a little more time, but I think for other reasons, we're still kind of time challenged. You know, there's always a push to get more done. And how do we kind of give ourselves that space and time to really go into true listening and deep listening and listen to connect and be real with people? Because I guess when I think about that, it may take me more time in this conversation right now, you know, I'm being hypothetical here, but where, you know, I might be moving from one thing to the next and somebody comes to me with some need or want or just a curiosity or just a hello. I can speed past that and dismiss that person. And who knows what long-term effect or short-term effect that has. But it's like an investment of my time and energy. If I take that time to establish, I like these words, establish a genuine link to people's emotions. Yeah. Then and be more authentic, as Andy is saying. COVID's showing us how we can be more authentic. And it's an investment of our time. And maybe if that conversation actually hits the mark, we won't have to have it 9 other times to get to that place where we're in agreement or that we come to a place of resolution. So, yeah. I want to thank you all for your time. I know we've got just a few minutes left. I'm sharing a quote from Judith, and this was kind of her mantra. And she's, what if we aspire to greatness? And this can be true of the culture in our home, the culture with our workmates, the culture in a country. But if we can get to the next level of greatness, which depends on the quality of our culture, which depends on the quality of our relationships, which depends on the quality of our conversations. Everything happens through conversations. And if you want to learn more, there's the book. It's still available on Amazon. And I'll tell you, if you look up Conversational Intelligence and Judith E. Glaser, there are a number of YouTubes that come up that can give you a broader base of information than what I've shared with you today. The book is really helpful. It focuses on developing leadership in organizations. And then there's the this CIQ Catalyst tool, which allows somebody to get some feedback on the conversational patterns that they tend to exhibit and which areas they may want to develop more. So thank you all. I'm pretty much done, but I'll hang out for a couple of minutes if there's anything anybody else wants to share or discover.
Well, thank you, Lynn. All the thank yous are coming through the chat, and I'd just like to echo them as well on behalf of everyone here at Open Door Coaching and the entire alumni and everyone that's on the line. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for sharing the conversational intelligence framework for supporting healthy conversations. And I think particularly during Mental Health Awareness Week 2020, it's so good to have those frameworks and to really focus on those frameworks which allow us to let go of assumptions and step down that ladder of assumptions. And the main thing that I learned just to remember, which is so important, I think, during Mental Health Awareness Week, is that listening to connect so we can build trust. So on behalf of everyone, once again, thank you so much. We really appreciated your time and everything that you had to share with us today. And you can see all the thanks coming through to the chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. If you're interested in seeing the other presentations that we've done for Mental Health Awareness Week, you can go onto our website at opendoorcoaching.com.au. The presentations are being loaded up over the next couple of days. There's lots of wealth of knowledge and experience to learn. And if you're interested in extending your coaching skills to be able to do more work around mental health first aid, then we have mental health first aid training, which we have trained now hundreds of people in mental health first aid. It's not coaching. It's a way of actually, well, it's not a coaching course. It's actually a course on mental health first aid, and it's a way of being able to have supportive conversations if we identify that with our clients. So again, pop onto opendoorcoaching.com.au, check out the mental health first aid offering that we have there, and it's got 24 CCEUs. So all the coaches on the line, that is the easiest and most cost efficient way and the best way actually to pick up your CCEUs, because you're learning about mental health awareness. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for the time this morning. And as always, please look after yourselves, enjoy your coaching, look after your own mental health, not just this week, but as we go on. And we will say goodbye for now.